We're still in biomolecules, and this is going to be your lecture over lipids. Just like all the other ed puzzles you've done, these are going to be guided C notes. So I want you to watch the video and handwrite your C notes using the key points that are provided in the ed puzzle. Once you're done, I want you to review your C notes. I mean, read them, clean them up, and then type them into your notebook, or at least the important information into your notebook. There's already a pre-formatted C note section in your notebook. The ancestral question for it, or the link for it, is why are fats awesome? So you could click on that link and it'll take you to that blank C note page. Before we actually get into lipids though, I want to kind of do a quick review over biomolecules and carbohydrates from the last class. So up here on the screen you can see there's two molecules here. And the question is, which one of these is a biomolecule? And there was a very similar question to this on a STAR test a couple years ago, where it had a picture of 4 different molecules, and one of them was a biomolecule, and you had to identify which one. So the way you would answer this question is you would remember that all of our biomolecules, or molecules of life, have to contain some elements. Right? So there's 4 biomolecules. There's carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. And if you remember, there's that CLAC acronym that I told you to remember, CLAP, and you go carb, lipid, acid, protein. And then you say the elements that are associated with those biomolecules, which are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. But we say it as CHO, CHOMP, CHON. That's how I always teach it. So if you followed along, you would hear that there's at least a C, an H, and an O in all of my biomolecules. So this molecule on the left, you can see there is a carbon, there's hydrogens, there's oxygens, and if I kind of look through here, there's not any other of those elements. So I have a CHO in here, but the element or the biomolecule or the molecule over here on the right has carbon and hydrogen, but there are no oxygen molecules. So I know that this one can't be a biomolecule. So while it is a molecule, it's a collection of elements, it is not a biomolecule because it does not contain that oxygen. Whereas the one on the left does. It has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Remember, all biomolecules have to have that CHO in it. So, and we could actually look at this and narrow it down to either carbohydrates or lipids, because if we did that CHO, CHOMP, CHON, the nucleic acids and proteins would have to have a nitrogen and a phosphorus, and there is no N or P in these elements. So I know it would have to be a carbohydrate or a lipid. If you remember from the carbohydrate lecture, the elements are arranged with 1 carbon to every 2 hydrogens to every 1 oxygen. And if you counted all these up, you would see there are 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens, so C6H12O6. And this picture here is going to be glucose, which is that most common monomer that we use to build up our sugars or our carbohydrates. And you could always tell that by that shape. The shape right here will always represent a glucose, at least for the purpose of our class. And sometimes you'll see the shape without any of the elements on there, but it's still going to represent a glucose. Or sometimes what they like to do is they don't put the actual C's in here. So you just know that anywhere there's an angle, that would constitute a C or a carbon, and you would just count those angles. They might put this C up here, the one at the top. But this right here is a glucose monomer or a monosaccharide, and that's our building block for most of our other carbohydrates, and that's really important that you guys remember that. So here's a little quick review of our carbohydrates. One easy to remember, or way to remember it, is you guys know this word hydrate, right? Hydro is water. So what a carbohydrate is, it's just carbon and water, or C for carbon, and then water, H2O, CH2O. And most of our carbohydrates are going to have that ratio. So like glucose, the one that you definitely have to remember, has that ratio of C6H12O6, which is 1 to 2 to 1. So this is a carbohydrate. Here's another carbohydrate, ribose, C5H10O5. This is a sugar that's found in DNA. One other thing, a little trick for knowing carbohydrates, is most of them end in ose, O-S-E. So if you ever have a really difficult word that you see like on a star test or something, and it ends in ose, it's going to be a carbohydrate or at least related to sugar, like glucose or ribose or maltose or dextrose. Um, so most of our carbohydrates end in ose. Now some of our larger ones are polysaccharides, are different, like starch doesn't end in ose, but a lot of them do. So that's a good way to remember that ose. All right, and just to remember this, monomer is a single unit. So here's a single unit of glucose again. And if I put a bunch of these monomers together, I bond them together, I'm going to make a polymer. So here's a polymer of starch, which is a long chain of glucoses. Remember, starch is like how plants store energy. So this would be a large polymer or large polysaccharide. Um, so poly means a whole bunch, and it means a whole bunch of these monomers. All right. And our major use for carbohydrates is really quick energy. So we eat the starch to get these glucoses, and then we'll turn these glucoses into ATP, or we'll use the glucose to make ATP. So high starch foods like bread and pasta and stuff like that, we get a lot of the sugar out of it to make energy. Um, Starch is actually how plants store their glucose. So we eat a plant, or we use that plant to bake bread or something like that. Now, glycogen is very similar to starch. So it's a bunch of glucoses that are bonded together, but it's going to be found in animals. And we store it in our liver, and this is what our liver looks like, in our muscles. So, when we eat like a cow, we get a lot of glycogen out of it because that cow is storing some glucose in its muscles that it could use for quick energy later on. So starch, glycogen, that would be energy storage. And then the other thing would be structure. So our carbohydrates are used for plant structure, like cellulose makes up the cell wall of plants. And it's still just a lot of glucoses put together. And it makes this really strong cell wall, which allows plants to stand up and stuff like that. And then if it's found in an animal, or like a crustacean, or even some fungi or some insects, it's called chitin, and it's fairly similar to this cellulose. It's just a whole bunch of glucose that comes together to form like the skin uh, of the butterfly body, or the underside of this mushroom, this fungi, or even the shells of these crustaceans. Right. And that brings us into our next one. We're talking about lipids, right? And when we're in class, I've always started off with this picture. I love it. We usually have a good discussion over this picture. And I like to ask you what it is, and eventually somebody will figure it out, especially our health science people. But what this is an artery. So arteries are the blood vessels that come out of the heart, and it transports oxygen, or blood with oxygen in it, to all the cells in our body. And you could see there's some fat in here. So this yellow stuff, this is fat that's on the outside of that artery. And most of your arteries have that, or most of your body has that, because we use these fats for like protection and insulation and stuff like that. But inside of this artery, you see some types of fats too, or lipids. And this is like cholesterol buildup and stuff like that, plaque inside of your artery. And what it's done is it's kind of occluded it, so blood flow can't come through here very well anymore. And if this was an artery in your heart, that would be a heart attack. So blood can't get through here, so all the cells that are below this point are not going to get enough oxygen, and those cells can die, and that would be a heart attack if it was in your heart. Or if this happened in your brain, it happens a lot too, like women get a lot of strokes. That's what that would be. So blood is occluded, it doesn't flow through here very well, and then the cells, like brain cells, don't get enough oxygen, and those cells can die. So lipids can be good things like this, where it pads it, or lipids can be bad things like this, where it causes heart attacks and strokes and stuff like that. And that's our topic today. Our topic is lipid, and once again, our central question are, why are fats awesome? Okay. And you guys should know this already. So our carbohydrates are going to be our sugars, right? Our elements in there are cho. So when I keep saying cho, cho, chomp, chon, this is what I'm referring to. So we go carbs, lipids, acids, proteins, and the associated elements are going to be cho, cho, chomp, and chon. So carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and carbs, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and lipids. I'm going to add nitrogen and phosphorus for my DNA. And then it's just going to be carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen for my proteins. And my proteins, we find a lot of that in our meat, right? So if we want a high protein diet, we're going to eat a lot of meat, like chicken breast or something. But today we're talking about fats or lipids, right? So lipids are a very important part of our diet. It's our oils like vegetable oil or olive oil or corn oil. These cooking things like Crisco shortening. Um, Here's some more oils. Here's a steroid or cholesterol. Butter is a type of fat, or even like soaps. There's a lot of fat in soap. In fact, a long time ago, a lot of soap was made from whale fat, and that's how you would clean yourself. You just rub whale fat all over your body. Um, but some of these are good for you, and some of them are bad for you. And it's kind of easy to figure out, like, it's much healthier to eat a liquid fat than it is to have a solid fat or liquid at room temperature. And going back to that picture here, like, would you rather have butter packed in here that could occlude it, or would you have oil going through here, which actually goes through it pretty easily, right? So the solid at room temperature stuff, those are bad for you, but the liquid fats are a lot healthier for you. All right. So there's actually three types of lipids that we're going to talk about. There's more than that, but three that we're going to talk about. And the first one is just going to be general fat. This would be like body fat, like triglycerides. So this is the polysaccharide, or I'm sorry, the polymer right here is triglycerides, and that's just fat. So butter is a triglyceride, oil is a triglyceride, or body fat. So if somebody has a big belly, they got a lot of triglycerides. Second one are phospholipids, and we've talked a ton about these phospholipids. These are those heads with two tails that make up our cell membranes. So phospholipids would be a polymer, right? And it's got these different parts. It's got the glycerol head, the two fatty acid tails, and then they make up that cell membrane. And every cell in the world has a cell membrane made out of phospholipids. And then our third kind of broad category is going to be steroids. This will include things like hormones and cholesterol. So here's the female hormone, estrogen. Here's the male hormone, testosterone. And they have these specific shapes. And I've actually seen a sticker of this on a lot of cars. And these people are apparently fitness experts or fitness addicts or bodybuilders or something. And it makes me think that they actually use steroids to help get their muscles bigger. Because you could inject like the male hormone testosterone in your body and then get really big muscles. Obviously that's illegal in sports, and you can't just go down the street and buy the testosterone because there's bad side effects to it. Like if I take too much testosterone, well, I'll grow a lot of like hair. I might get real angry, or my voice will get deeper. You get real bad acne a lot of the times. So those are steroids. There's a fourth one, waxes. So wax, like you would have like earwax or candle wax. Those are lipids. And really, what a lipid is it's not able to dissolve in water, and that's kind of the major thing about lipids. All right. So let's look at fats real fast. So our triglycerides, that is our polymer right here, triglycerides. And what it is, it's made out of four parts. It's got this glycerol head, and then we're going to add three fatty acids onto it. So you have a fatty acid here, a fatty acid here, and a fatty acid here. So that's why they call it a triglyceride, because there's three fats. And I said earlier that some fats are healthy for you and some are bad. And if you look on like a nutrition label, it'll say it has this much saturated fat, maybe this much unsaturated fat. And saturated fat is actually unhealthy. It's solid at room temperature, like butter. It has to do with the straight line fatty acid. So that straight line is kind of bad. But if I have a bent line, that's an unsaturated fat, and that's a lot healthier. Like oils will be bent. And the reason that these saturated fats are solid at room temperature is because you can pack them together real tight because they're nice straight lines. Whereas these are bent, so it's kind of harder to pack them together. And that's why they're liquid at room temperature. So here's kind of what a fat would look like. So here's a triglyceride, saturated, right? So here's my glycerol, and then here's my 3 fatty acids. So that would be my butter, it's solid at room temperature. Or here's an unsaturated fat. So I have my glycerol, and then I have 3 fatty acids, but one of them's bent, and that would be liquid at room temperature. And these liquid ones would be a lot healthier than the solid ones. Might not taste as good, but they're healthier. All right. So there's 2 main functions of fats, and this is really, really important for you to understand. And the first one is going to be long-term energy storage, okay? And they're going to try to trick you on your STAR test because our short-term energy is our sugars, our glucose, right? But fats are long-term energy storage. In fact, if you eat like way too much sugar, your body will actually convert a lot of that sugar into this body fat, into your triglycerides, so that it has energy stored later on when it needs it. So long-term energy storage. And then another one would be insulation and protection. Or actually a main function, I probably should have put it on here, would be the phospholipids, or making up that cell membrane. But our triglycerides are insulation or protection of your organs and stuff like that. All right, and that brings us to phospholipids. So our second type of polymer for lipids is going to be a phospholipid, and this is that head with the 2 fatty acid tails. So these fatty acids are actually the same fatty acids you would find in triglycerides. There's just 2 of them instead of 3. So our phospholipids make up cell membranes. So I'll have a double layer of these, a bilayer. So these will be on the outside, then over here I'll have another one. But that'll separate the inside from the outside of a cell. And it's these fatty acids, which kind of prevent some things from getting into the cell. It helps maintain homeostasis, right? So phospholipids make up that cell membrane. So you can see here's a head, and then there's 2 tails on it, and here's a head with 2 tails on it. So I have a bilayer. Here's 1 layer, there's 2 layers, and I got like outside of my cell, inside of my cell. I really like this picture for it because it kind of shows how it turns into a 3-dimensional like cell shape, like a ball or something. So here's my 1 layer of phospholipids, here's my other layer of phospholipids, then this will be inside my cell with like my nucleus and all my organelles. And then our third class is going to be steroids. So cholesterol, like that picture I showed you before. So here's some cholesterol building up inside my artery, and it's preventing blood from getting through here. And that would be like a heart attack or a stroke. And your hormones here, like your estrogen, your testosterone. All right, so that's a real quick overview of what you need to know over lipids. Here's a little review of all your biomolecules. Now we've covered carbohydrates. So our monomer for carbs, you need to know, is glucose. Well, if I put a bunch of those glucoses together, I make one of these things, either starch, glycogen, cellulose, or chitin. And remember, starch and glycogen are going to be quick energy. Starch is found in a plant. Glycogen is found in an animal. Cellulose or chitin, that's going to be structure. So cellulose would be cell walls. Chitin would be like the shell of a crab. And the elements found in my carbohydrates are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And then what we talked about today are lipids. Our monomers or building blocks would be fatty acids and glycerol. Our polymers, there's 3 of them: phospholipids, triglycerides, steroids. Remember, my phospholipids make up cell membranes. My triglycerides is that long-term storage of energy or insulation, and then my steroids would be like hormones and stuff like that. But they still have the same elements: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Now, one of the differences between this is, remember, carbs are in that 1 carbon, 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen combination, where you will not see that in lipids. In fact, you have a whole bunch of carbons and hydrogens and not as much oxygen, because a fatty acid is made out of nothing but carbon and hydrogen. But you're not going to see much other things in there, no nitrogen and stuff like that. Then we haven't covered it yet, but nucleic acids, you need to know this. Our monomer is called a nucleotide. This is a house, a pool, and a basement. It's got 3 parts. If I put them together, I'll form something called DNA or RNA. And these are my elements in it. It's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and these are your genes. And then our last biomolecule, protein, made up of amino acids. You got to remember this later on too, but there'll be another lecture on it. There are actually 20 types of amino acids. They come together to form my proteins. Another word for protein is this right here, polypeptide. And it has carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen in it. And proteins do a whole bunch of stuff. The important one for this class is enzymes, but they're also part of your immune system. It's how your cells communicate. It's how your bones connect to each other and your muscles connect to bones. So it does a lot of things inside your body. So once again, carbs, lipids, acids, protein, or CLAP, clap, and then cho, chomp, chon. And then that's it. So take a screenshot after you type up your CNOTs. Email that screenshot to me for a grade. My email is oren.dart@fwisd.org. And if you turn it in on time, which is before next class, you'll get 100. If you turn it in late, you're going to get a 70. All right. Email me if you have any questions. I hope you guys have a good day.